first setting the context for the building that I'm about to show. It's not really a building, it's the initial proposals that are about to go into a pre-application. So we're at a fairly early stage in the process, as much as we all would like to have pushed it on somewhat further. So for those of you that are not from Lewis, the site for the building, it's slightly darker in that screen, kind of it's black against the grey, and it's on the town side of what will be quite a considerable new development, which is currently an industrial site which goes on to the river, which at the moment is the current car park at the bottom of North Street, it's Brook Street car park, and it was owned by the District Council, and it's part of the overall development for the Phoenix project. So it's on one side it's bounded by a residential street, Spring Gardens. To the west there's quite a steep embankment with trees which goes up to community gardens and cemetery, and on the west side is the current industrial site. Interestingly, there was an industrial shed before it became a car park. It was part of the residential tight-knit streets that we see further up the hill in Lewis. In terms of the context and the scale of the building that's proposed, it's interesting to note the scale of the Phoenix Works and the industrial site over the way. And also the one which is just up the hill is the old jail, and which the remains of the walls in there. It's now where the police station is. The scale of that as a building is, I think, relevant to the proposed building that's going to be at the bottom of the site. But of course, the context, which you all know, is not really the car park that's there in the industrial buildings opposite. The context will be a substantial new development, which is predominantly housing, but is a mixed-use development. So rather than being a car park next to a hill on the opposite from industrial buildings, it's opposite what will be the centre of around 700 new homes. And on the other side of North Street, which runs down from North Street into the heart of the development, will be a mixed uses on the other side of where the new health hub will be. A little bit about the task of designing quite a large health facility, which I haven't done before. We designed a GP surgery up in Cambridge. This is at a much larger scale. And what do architects do when faced with such a challenge? This is my dad. You can't really see him there. About a week before he died, which was January last year. And he was in Adam Brooks Hospital, which it was fantastic to see some of the slides of hospitals and their environment. Of course, we have great comfort in the fact that people there really do know what they're doing, and we want them to know what they're doing. And there's a security in that. But the environment that mostly we find ourselves in is somewhat bleak. So the warmth and compassion of the nurses was extraordinary, and the place that my dad died was a sad one, sad in terms of the opposite of joy, of uplifting. And one of the residing images I will have, this is the house that he came from, and we wished we had been able to get them back home to, which I designed for them in about 2005. It was full of light and views out into the garden. Instead of which the sill of the window of the room he was in couldn't enable him to see out to the trees below. And the enduring image I had of my dad on his back is of the fluorescent ceiling, lights in the ceiling above him, which is quite I mean, he's a man full of joy. Yeah. He was chatting up a nurse at age 92 who started to see his death. And then, bugger me if that wasn't enough, I got diagnosed with cancer at the same time. And so I got to know Adam Brooks Hospital really well over the following 3 months of going there every day, being put in that strange contraption on the right-hand side. Can't quite make out on the bottom, but I'm sure you're all familiar with the dreary waiting spaces that we are subject to in large hospitals, and the feeling that gives you where you're waiting with trepidation of something which is carries with it such anxiety. That's me on the top left, having completed my course of treatment, and the first time I went away and went into the sea, stone lighter and much happier. And on the top left there is the health campus at Adam Brooks, which thankfully is on the edge of Cambridge, where I'm from, and beyond which is quite a lot of there's actually a little nature reserve and quite a bit of fish. That in time will be built on. The health campus is due to expand along with the southern part of the city around it. But at the moment, there is a route to a nature reserve, which, believe me, I took every opportunity to escape the damn place and go into the trees. And once the treatment was over for the day, I drove to a nearby wood and followed an ancient track. And never before had a spring felt so poignant, the idea of new life and renewal. And of course we all intuitively know that nature is the great healer, but to feel it in such a way was pretty instructive for me. On the flip side, the task that we were given here was a curious one. The building has already been through an iteration before we became involved. As many of you know, the planning was granted, I think 5 years ago, for a previous iteration of the development for the same site, on which there was the proposal for the Family Health Hub, which had already a design attached to it. So the GPs, with their precious time, which Helen alluded to, had already given up quite a lot of time to briefing the previous architects and coming to a brief and an area schedule. So we were denied in some senses the process of getting to know our GPs and coming to a joint vision, which Helen has talked about already. Instead of which we have an area schedule which is developed by NHS planners and is a kind of strict requirement. And in some stages at this part of the process, what is required from us as the developers is for them to understand what that car park can fit on it. Originally they thought it could fit the health hub and another building. For them to be able to come to an understanding of the value of the physical land and get into negotiations with the NHS in terms of what they will have to pay the NHS, or what the NHS will pay for the lease of the building, and therefore all the money kind of spent on it. So it's a kind of chicken and egg situation, and we're stuck in the middle of that when we'd rather be designing the quality of the healthcare building. Nevertheless, we start with an area schedule and get to understand the quite complex way in which this particular health hub is going to work. And as has been described, the way in which it's not just going to be for GPs, it's going to be for a whole other community practitioners who are bringing other services into the same location. And us understanding the relationships between them. Complicating that is that the site can fit more than just the requirements for the health hub at the moment. It's all in a state of flux. So there's a space which could have a secondary use on the top floor of the building, and the nearby dentist surgery have indicated a wish to take space on the top floor. And then there's another space which may have other health-related functions, but are all sharing the same building. So potentially quite a complex mix. And to date, what we have done is produced a plan which is there for the purposes of getting an outline planning secured for the site. That's really important because as you all know from Lewis, this site is prone to flooding, and without a flood wall being built, the foundry are unable to build the healthcare building in that location. So the one is dependent upon the other. And so we are part of the process of the whole of the development going into outline planning. And so we're precluded from going on to a much more detailed design of the healthcare building until that process is complete and we know whether or not we are able to build it at all. I won't run through the plan in detail. We can go back to that if there are questions. But the bits that are important are on the top right of the screen. As you go down Mill Street, you come to the first part of the building. There's a retail unit, hope to be a pharmacy, which is what you first see. And then there's an entrance tucked away. You can see the two little columns at the front door there, and a drop-off space, disabled space, ambulance drop-off. And then on the bottom of the site, south-facing onto the residential street, there's a garden which is surrounded on three sides by the healthcare buildings. And that central entrance space enables a more efficient use of and access to all of the accommodation. Broadly speaking, there's an area that's clinical, an area that's non-clinical. It's quite a lot of administrative aspects to the building which need to be accommodated. I think overall there's 190 staff. Is that right? 178. There's about 178 staff that we're working there. And we've calculated that we need about 140 bicycle spaces. So it's actually quite a lot to fit on the site. On the bottom there's a little garden which will be off North Street, and then the cycle spaces on the garden side, the south side, for the staff arriving in the morning. A little diagram of the way in which that large building, in the context, it's within the conservation area, in the context of Lewis, can be broken up to feel like a less imposing building. It steps down to 2 stories at the street. The little building with the rooftop garden is where the pharmacy is on the ground floor. There's enough space for the little square at the entrance to have tree planting in it, and then you've got a fully treed garden that all the waiting spaces will have gone to, as well as a number of the treatment and training rooms. But more particularly in terms of the conversation that's been had about well-being and the understanding we've had about the way in which the healthcare is part of the surrounding the surroundings, and not everything needs to happen within one building. The healthcare the new hub is in the context of a new development that is not solely housing. There's actually an unusually large amount of non-housing use in the new development. And the drawing there, which is at the centre of the development, demonstrates that there's a lot of activity on that ground floor, a lot of opportunity for other things to be there. So quite a number of the industrial buildings are going to be retained and used as workshops and maker spaces and venues. There's a number of non-residential uses that are proposed as a hotel and a bar and an event space. But there's also opportunities for other health-related businesses to locate there. So the idea that it's not one building doing everything is very pertinent to this particular development. It's also a car-free, which doesn't mean that cars can't go about it. That's a necessity. But at the bottom of the plan of Phoenix Causeway is a car park, which will also have car clubs and electric bike hire. There's been questions about the proximity of the parking to the health hub. That's one of the main anxieties that people have, and that I'm sure will be talked about in greater detail. Just to note, though, that Addenbrooke's Hospital, which is, I don't know how many times greater than the proposed health hub, but it must be 10, 20, 30, I don't know, a lot bigger. No one is able to park their car right next to the entrance. You have to go to one of 3 car parks. And it's 193 metres, I know this route very well, 193 metres from car park 1 to where either my dad was or I had to go for my treatment. And it's 185 from the proposed mobility hub to the healthcare, proposed healthcare hub. So it's not insurmountable. We do, of course, have to have adequate space to drop off for those that have impaired mobility. I took my 96-year-old aunt out of Brooklyn, a really lovely place, just yesterday, and you have to find a spot, drop her off, find a receipt, go and park the car, come back. This is normal. But the quality of the place is part of the ambition to consider well-being as a part of the overall picture of the development, not just what is going to happen in the health hub. So the aspects that the Phoenix development has, just in case I miss anything, within there's creative workspaces, community uses, youth activities, and cultural venues. So that's about a sharing of resources and spaces. There's an ethos of sharing in that there's co-living spaces, co-working spaces, and shared gardens. And I'm sure the developers will be setting up mechanisms to make all those work in reality. And there's obviously, because of the nature of the developer, there's an ambition to reduce consumption by having shared recycling, electric car club, and electric bike carriage. And there's green everywhere, which is going to make a palpable difference to the quality of the urban space. Hopefully there will be no one dying of bad urban design in this place. And my own background, I started off doing housing. I've done lots of houses, and we've done a number of buildings with community groups, and have always worked with natural materials and timber, and understood the value that light and warmth. We've designed passive house buildings. For a long time I've worked on low energy passive solar buildings. The building on the left there, you can't quite see, has plants growing up the whole of the facade. It's on a ring road, and part of our philosophy is about treating the air which comes in through the windows. Spaces that inspire, that have a tactility, a material quality. That's a communal hub in the co-housing project that we've designed in Cambridge, and two recent co-working spaces that were designed in Greenwich, which are based around timber frame structures with the surfeit of natural light. So that's what I hope we will be bringing to this project. I know we're running out of time, so we'll skip over this perhaps. But some thoughts about the scale of the proposed building in relation to other large buildings in Lewes. This is a civic building related to other civic buildings in Lewes. Its scale is comparable to the largest building in Lewes, and we have to think of it as having that level of importance. So we haven't got into designing it in detail. We've got a long way to go. I really hope we're going to be able to get into conversations in much greater detail about the ambitions of the practice. I'd love to say hello to you afterwards and talk to you about the idea of leadership from the Health Authority. And thank you to Oliver for this opportune moment to consider the point we're at in the process of design. Thanks.
Oliver, I think we'll take a few questions for both Helen and Meredith. Who would like to kick off?
As a resident and user of the healthcare in Lewes, I wondered if there's an opportunity perhaps to look at patient experiences of 3 different GP sites within Lewes, which are very different in character and history. And I wondered if we had any insight into how patients experience those different sites.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully I made it clear the slightly odd trajectory of the project that we have inherited. And it was a very odd thing for me to start a project that was that's already been designed and then think about how it can be redesigned. And I really do hope we get the opportunity to fully consider the building, not from scratch, because there's aspects of it that will have an outline plan, but there's an awful lot that's up to scratch. And part of that will be having an understanding about what works, what doesn't work. There's a patient group that I've talked to, it would be good to engage with. So yes is the answer.
Historically, there was more flexible demographics. And there are various reasons which we shouldn't go to here, historically how that happened. And so, but it would be good to see what they think though. Interesting,
And people here.
so one of my partners was talking about how people at the St Andrews building often say how therapeutic it is. I went back and said to my 17-year-old daughter about this, and she laughed and said, "Oh my God, it's disgusting, it's really offensive, it's really awful." So, from a teenager's point of view, it's completely different, but they probably wouldn't have much voice, they just would go where their parents take more, they don't go that much as they, would hope to build something better and more open and more encouraging for them. So, it's partly, it'll be about, perhaps, yes, it'd be good to get a view of the people from each site, but also be mindful of the people who haven't necessarily got a voice on why they don't go there and what their perhaps biases for why they choose that site historically.
And are there buildings for healthcare that of course, what the service that's delivered is what really matters, but are there places you go to and you think, I would really like to, this could really bring something?
I think the linking, to find within that building, we can link out to spokes, like the community allotments and the community orchards, and build on those so they're integral, both completely contractually as well as practically. But if we can build that sense of whether it's, it's me, I know architectural knowledge obviously, but if there's a way for that to be integral and seen as part that is built into tiling in the walls or some mosaic or something, that there's this sense of all these other areas that links up with that could be quite powerful. I think those are the really very when you look at how very humble ways of the community have powerful medicine in them, and just looking at some of the village halls and how they're used to link the elderly and the young, and some of the, there's so many health-related resources. And then I'm linking up with the schools as well. That might be more appropriate to deliver health. There's reasons why healthcare in schools in Lewis is not delivered in the same way as elsewhere at the moment. And that, so in terms of therapeutic environment, it might be better delivering, linking up. There might be room to link up healthcare environment within schools, for example.
I mean, what's brilliant, and why I thank all of it, is you've got the developer here, the GP surgery, the architects, and the, not the NHS.
Public health.
Public health. And there needs to be a conversation that this might start off.
Samantha, could I just ask, come on in, would you mind talking about the Hollywood example that you showed us earlier? Because I think I had the privilege of going to that building with you.
Can we, Andrew, running extremely late, but can we return to this in the break?
Yeah.
20 minutes. Just very, if you want to make
John, the point is that Hollywood, it's all about different communities, their healthcare coming together, and this is in the context of Belfast, right? It's amazing.
It's a long story, but it can be summarised if we have time later.
Well, why don't we say, Oliver, that during the break, if anybody's particularly interested in the foundry, and I'm Michael Mouse, and I'm co-founder of Human Nature, the developer, as Meredith, the recently But why don't we, anyone that has a particular interest, like during the break, just have a little huddle.
Yeah.
Okay.